For 8 centuries, two superpowers clashed across the stars, wielding weapons that bent reality and minds that spanned galaxies. Crystalline empires shattered planets. Living ships consumed suns. But nothing changed. The war didn't just scar the galaxy, it became it. Peace was a forgotten language, until a message was sent to a primitive world on the edge of known space. Earth and humanity? We didn't send diplomats, we didn't send warriors, we sent something far more dangerous. An idea. When giants could not move mountains, the Catherian Empire stretched across 3,000 star systems, their crystalline cities floating in the void like frozen lightning. For 847 years, they had been locked in combat with the Nixari Collective, whose living ships grew like flowers in the darkness of space. Between them lay a battlefield that spanned half the galaxy, where neither side could claim victory and neither would accept defeat. Ambassador Zethkar stood before the quantum communication array on the neutral station Harmony Point, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's soft light into rainbow patterns. His species communicated through harmonic frequencies that could shatter mountains or sing stars into being. But today, his voice carried only exhaustion. The war had consumed everything. Entire generations had been born, lived, and died knowing nothing but conflict. The humans have responded to our transmission, announced Mediator Quill, his feathered form rustling with barely contained frustration. The avian diplomat had spent the last century trying to broker peace between the two superpowers, watching his efforts crumble like sand castles before the tide. They claim they can help. High Commander Vexra's consciousness rippled through the organic walls of her bioship, her thoughts manifesting as bioluminescent patterns across the living surface. The Nexari spoke through biochemical signals, their collective minds sharing experiences that individual species could never comprehend. Humans, her translated voice carried skepticism. The primitive mammals who only achieved interstellar travel 50 cycles ago? What could they possibly understand about our conflict? The war had begun over resources, as most wars did. The Andromedas Nebula contained the richest deposits of quantum crystals in the known galaxy, materials essential for both Catherian energy matrices and Nixari bioenhancement processes. But what had started as a territorial dispute had evolved into something far more complex. Neither species could remember the original cause anymore, only that they had always been enemies. The Catherians fought with weapons that bent reality itself, their crystal technologies manipulating fundamental forces with elegant precision. They could create pocket dimensions, freeze time in localized fields, and generate shields that existed in 17 different dimensional phases simultaneously. Their warriors were living gems, beings of pure energy housed in crystalline shells that could survive in the vacuum of space or the core of a star. The Nixari countered with biological marvels that defied conventional understanding. Their ships were grown rather than built, vast organisms that could heal from damage, adapt to new threats, and reproduce in the depths of space. They wielded viruses that could rewrite the laws of physics, bacteria that consumed energy itself, and symbiotic partners that existed partially in quantum states. Their collective consciousness meant that destroying one ship only strengthened the resolve of 1,000 others. For 8 centuries, these two forces had clashed in an endless stalemate. The Catherians would advance with their crystal fleets, reality, bending around their passage like water around a stone. The Nixari would respond with bioswarms that could evolve countermeasures faster than any computer could calculate solutions. Planets had been consumed, stars had been dimmed, and entire sectors of space had become uninhabitable wastelands where the laws of physics still bore scars from their conflict. The Galactic Mediation Council had tried everything. They had proposed partition treaties, resource-sharing agreements, and even complete territorial separation. The Altarian peace process had lasted 60 years before collapsing over a single misinterpreted harmonic frequency. The Centauri Accords had failed when a Nixari bioform accidentally consumed a sacred Catherian crystal garden. Each attempt at peace had only deepened the mistrust between the two powers. Dr. Elena Vasquez received the quantum transmission while reviewing psychological profiles at the International Diplomatic Institute in Geneva. Earth's first contact with galactic civilization had come not through dramatic first contact scenarios, but through a desperate plea for help broadcast to every inhabited system in the galaxy. The message was simple. An ancient war was destroying everything, and traditional diplomatic methods had failed. "Marcus, you need to see this," Elena called to her colleague, Captain Marcus Chen, who was reviewing military logistics reports in the adjacent office. The former Marine had transitioned to diplomatic security after Earth's recent entry into galactic politics, bringing a practical military perspective to complement Elena's psychological expertise. The message that appeared on their shared holographic display was unlike anything either had seen. It wasn't just audio or visual communication, but a multi-dimensional data package that conveyed emotions, historical context, and sensory experiences simultaneously. They could feel the weariness of species that had fought for longer than human civilization had existed, the desperate hope that maybe anyone could find a solution where they had failed. 847 years, Marcus said quietly, his military mind automatically calculating the logistics involved. That's longer than the Byzantine Empire lasted, longer than most human civilizations have existed at all. Elena studied the cultural and psychological profiles embedded in the transmission. Both species were highly advanced, more so than humanity by several orders of magnitude. The Catherians had technologies that could manipulate space-time itself, while the Nexari had mastered biological sciences that bordered on magic. Yet neither could find a way to end their conflict. "Look at this." Elena highlighted sections of the data stream. Both species are showing signs of cultural exhaustion, birth rates declining, innovation stagnating, entire populations suffering from what we would recognize as generational trauma. They're not fighting because they want to anymore. They're fighting because they don't know how to stop. The psychological profiles were fascinating from a human perspective. The Catherians, despite their crystal nature, showed emotional patterns, remarkably similar to human responses to prolonged stress. Their harmonic communications had grown increasingly discordant over the centuries, their crystal cities taking on darker, more angular designs that reflected their collective mood. They had become trapped in patterns of thinking as rigid as their crystalline forms. The Nexari presented a different but equally recognizable pattern. Their collective consciousness, initially their greatest strength, had become an echo chamber that amplified every grievance and multiplied every perceived slight. What had once been a flexible, adaptive species had grown increasingly reactive and predictable, their biological innovations focused solely on warfare rather than growth or exploration. "It's like watching two people in a bad marriage," Elena observed. "They've been fighting so long they've forgotten what they're fighting about, but they can't imagine any other way to relate to each other." Marcus pulled up the strategic assessments. "The military data is even more interesting. Look at these battle patterns. Both sides have developed such sophisticated countermeasures that they've essentially neutralized each other. Every Catherian advance is met by an exactly equivalent Nexari response. It's not a war anymore. It's a mathematical equation that always equals 0. The quantum transmission included a formal request for Earth to participate in peace negotiations, along with an explanation that confused both humans. Apparently, humanity's recent diplomatic successes in resolving smaller galactic conflicts had earned them a reputation as lateral thinkers, beings who could approach problems from angles that more advanced species couldn't perceive. Elena and Marcus spent the next week studying every piece of available information about the conflict. They consulted with Earth's best xenopsychologists, military strategists, and conflict resolution specialists. The consensus was both humbling and daunting. This was possibly the most complex diplomatic challenge in galactic history, and humanity's chances of success were essentially 0. "We have one advantage," Elena told the assembled diplomatic team during their final briefing. "We're new to this. We don't have 8 centuries of failed assumptions clouding our judgment. We can see patterns that they can't because we haven't been staring at them for so long that they've become invisible." The journey to Harmony Point took 3 weeks aboard the UES Determination, Earth's most advanced diplomatic vessel. During the transit, Elena and Marcus worked with their team to develop what they called the Outside Observer Protocol, a systematic approach to analyzing the conflict without being influenced by the historical baggage that had defeated previous mediators. When they arrived at the neutral station, they found themselves in the presence of beings that defied human imagination. Ambassador Zethkar's crystalline form towered 3 meters tall, his body a living prism that bent light into impossible colors. When he spoke, his voice resonated not just through sound, but through quantum vibrations that seemed to touch their souls directly. When logic meets heart, the revelation hung in the air of the diplomatic chamber like a discordant note in a symphony. For several minutes, neither Ambassador Zethkar nor High Commander Vexra spoke. Their alien forms seemed frozen, processing, a concept so simple that 8 centuries of advanced thinking had somehow overlooked it entirely. Elena watched their reactions carefully, her psychological training helping her read the subtle signs of cognitive dissonance across species barriers. Zethkar's crystalline structure was shifting through wavelengths of light that their translation systems couldn't interpret, while Vexra's bioluminescent patterns had gone completely dark across her ship's living walls. "You suggest," Zethkar finally said, his harmonic voice carrying overtones of confusion, "that we have been fighting over a resource that could theoretically support both our civilizations?" Marcus pulled up the holographic display they had prepared during their journey. The 3-dimensional map showed the Andromedas Nebula in unprecedented detail, compiled from both Catherian and Nexari survey data that had been shared with the Galactic Mediation Council over the centuries. "Not theoretically," Marcus replied, highlighting different sections of the nebula. "According to your own data, the quantum crystal deposits in Andromedas could supply both your civilizations for the next 50,000 years. The problem isn't scarcity. The problem is that you've been fighting over who gets to extract them instead of figuring out how to extract them together." Vexra's consciousness stirred, bioluminescent patterns beginning to flicker across her ship's surfaces. "The extraction methods are incompatible. Our biomining organisms consume the crystal matrices that the Catherians require for their energy harvesting, and our quantum extraction fields disrupt the biological processes that the Nexari depend upon," Zethkar added, his crystalline form brightening. "The 2 methods cannot coexist in the same space." Elena leaned forward, her expression patient but determined. "Have either of you ever tried developing compatible extraction methods? Or alternating extraction periods? Or even dividing the nebula into zones where each method could work independently?" The silence that followed was even longer than before. Elena could see Mediator Quill in her peripheral vision, the avian diplomat's feathers literally ruffling with what appeared to be embarrassment. The Galactic Mediation Council, despite centuries of effort, had apparently never asked these fundamental questions either. "The technical challenges would be considerable," Zethkar admitted slowly. "Our technologies operate on fundamentally different principles." "But not impossible challenges," Marcus pressed. "We've reviewed both your technological capabilities. Separately, you've both achieved things that should be impossible according to our understanding of physics. Together, you could probably reshape the galaxy if you wanted to." Over the following days, Elena and Marcus worked with both delegations to break down 8 centuries of assumptions and automatic responses. What they discovered was both fascinating and heartbreaking from a human perspective. The war had begun with legitimate resource competition, but it had long since evolved into something far more complex. Elena spent hours with Ambassador Zethkar, learning about Catherian psychology through careful observation and questioning. The crystalline beings experienced emotion through harmonic resonance, their feelings literally becoming music that shaped their physical forms. Centuries of war had created a cultural harmony built around themes of conflict and opposition. They had become so attuned to fighting that peaceful harmonies felt alien and uncomfortable. "We have forgotten how to sing of growth," Zethkar confided during one of their sessions. His crystalline form had shifted to deeper, sadder tones as he spoke. "Our young crystals learn war songs before they learn life songs. We have become a civilization that defines itself by what we oppose rather than what we create." Meanwhile, Marcus worked with High Commander Vexra to understand the Nexari collective consciousness. What he learned challenged every assumption about how minds could work. The Nexari didn't just share thoughts, they shared experiences, emotions, and even genetic memories across their entire species. The war had infected their collective psyche like a virus, creating trauma that was literally inherited by each new generation. Each death diminishes us all, Vexra explained, her bioluminescent patterns creating complex equations that Marcus's translation implant rendered as emotional mathematics. We carry the pain of every fallen collective member. 8 centuries of loss has made us afraid to hope for anything beyond survival. The breakthrough came during their 3rd week at Harmony Point. Elena had been studying the complete historical record of the conflict, not just the military engagements but the cultural and social changes that had accompanied them. What she found was a pattern that any human psychologist would recognize immediately. They're not enemies, she told Marcus during one of their evening strategy sessions. They're trauma bonded. They've been locked in this cycle of conflict for so long that they literally don't know how to exist without each other. Look at this. She displayed a timeline showing technological development in both civilizations. For the first century of the war, both species had continued advancing across multiple fields, but as the conflict dragged on, their innovation had narrowed, focusing almost exclusively on military applications and countermeasures against each other's abilities. They've been evolving specifically to fight each other for 8 centuries, Marcus realized. Their entire cultures have been shaped by this conflict. Ending the war isn't just about resources anymore. It's about helping 2 civilizations remember who they were before they became defined by fighting. The next day, Elena presented her analysis to both delegations. She used human psychological models adapted for alien psychology, showing how prolonged conflict had created codependent relationship patterns that were actually preventing either side from achieving decisive victory. You've become perfect enemies, she explained, her words causing visible reactions in both aliens. Every advance one of you makes, the other develops a counter. You're not trying to win anymore. You're trying to maintain the balance that keeps the conflict going because it's the only relationship you know how to have. Zethkar's harmonics grew discordant. You suggest that we desire to continue this war? Not consciously, Elena replied gently. But unconsciously? Yes. The war has become your shared identity. Cytherians are the people who fight Nexari. Nexari are the collective that opposes Cytherians. Without the conflict, who are you? The question hit both species like a physical blow. Vexra's bioluminescent patterns went through rapid cycles of confusion, while Zethkar's crystalline form dimmed to barely visible levels. Marcus stepped forward with the practical side of their proposal. We think you could be more than you've ever imagined. But it's going to require both of you to take risks that feel impossible after 8 centuries of conditioning. What followed was the most complex diplomatic negotiation in human history. Elena and Marcus weren't just mediating between 2 alien species. They were helping both civilizations rediscover fundamental aspects of themselves that had been buried under centuries of trauma and conditioning. The humans proposed something that had never been attempted in galactic history: a complete cultural exchange program. Not just diplomatic visits, but deep integration where Cytherian crystal singers would work alongside Nexari bioengineers to develop hybrid technologies that neither could create alone. The Andromedas Nebula is just the beginning, Elena explained. Your biomining processes could be enhanced with quantum field manipulation. Cytherian crystal matrices could be grown using biological templates. You could create extraction methods that are not only compatible but actually more effective than either of your current approaches. The resistance was immediate and predictable. Both species had cultural taboos against sharing their most advanced technologies with outsiders, especially with their ancient enemies. But Elena had expected this reaction and was prepared for it. We're not asking you to trust each other, she said carefully. We're asking you to trust the process. Start small, share one minor technology, work on one joint project. See what happens when you try to create something together instead of trying to destroy each other. Marcus provided the military perspective that both species could understand. Every great commander knows that the best way to defeat an enemy is to make them an ally. But what if your enemy was never really your enemy? What if they were always a potential partner who just happened to want the same things you wanted? The proposal they finally developed was elegantly simple. A 30-day trial period where both species would work together on a single, limited project, developing a hybrid extraction method for one small section of the Andromedas Nebula. If successful, they would expand the cooperation. If it failed, they could return to 8 centuries of war with no harm done. 30 days, Zethkar repeated, his harmonics carrying undertones of fear and hope in equal measure. 30 days to overcome 8 centuries of conditioning. 30 days to remember that you're both explorers, creators, and builders, Elena replied. The war made you forget that, but it doesn't have to define you forever. Vexra's consciousness rippled through complex patterns of consideration. The collective is curious. We have not created anything purely for the joy of creation. In many generations, the idea is both terrifying and appealing. The agreement was signed in a ceremony that combined Cytherian harmonic resonance with Nexari, bioluminescent communication. As the two species committed to their trial cooperation, something remarkable happened. For the first time in 8 centuries, their technologies harmonized instead of clashed. Zethkar's ceremonial crystal sang with frequencies that encouraged growth and creation. Vexra's bioluminescent patterns responded with mathematical equations that described symbiosis and mutual enhancement. The chamber filled with light and sound that neither species had experienced in living memory. It's beautiful, whispered Mediator Quill, his avian features reflecting wonder. In 300 years of diplomatic service, I have never seen anything like this. But even as they celebrated the agreement, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The trial would test whether cooperation was possible, but 8 centuries of war had created momentum that wouldn't be easily stopped. She had a growing suspicion that their fragile peace would be tested sooner than anyone expected. Marcus shared her concerns. 30 days might be 30 days too long, he told her privately. There are military forces on both sides who have built their entire careers around this conflict. They're not going to give up without a fight. Their concerns proved prophetic. On the very day the cooperation trial was scheduled to begin, an emergency signal reached Harmony Point. A previously unknown alien force had entered the galaxy, and they were heading directly for the Andromedas Nebula with obviously hostile intent. The 30-day trial was about to become a test of survival, and the ancient enemies would have to decide whether 8 centuries of hatred was stronger than the possibility of hope. 5 hours to peace. The emergency klaxons echoed through Harmony Point's corridors as Elena and Marcus rushed toward the command center. The past 24 days of the cooperation trial had exceeded everyone's expectations. Cytherian quantum fields had successfully enhanced Nexari biomining organisms, creating hybrid extractors that worked with impossible efficiency. More importantly, both species had begun to remember what it felt like to build rather than destroy. Now, everything was about to change. "Report," Marcus called out as they entered the tactical center where Ambassador Zethkar and High Commander Vexra were studying holographic displays with expressions of shock and growing alarm. "Unknown fleet detected at the galaxy's rim," Mediator Quill announced, his feathers bristled with tension. 3,000 vessels of completely alien design. They're moving directly toward the Andromedas Nebula at speeds that should be impossible. Elena studied the sensor data streaming across the displays. The unknown ships were unlike anything in galactic records, their hulls appearing to be constructed from some kind of living metal that constantly shifted and reformed. Their energy signatures were off the charts, suggesting power sources that dwarfed even Cytherian quantum matrices. "Time to intercept?" Marcus asked, his military training automatically calculating defensive possibilities. "At current speed, 14 hours, Vexra replied, her bioluminescent patterns cycling through rapid calculations. "But they are accelerating. Our projections suggest they could reach the nebula in as little as 8 hours if they maintain their current rate of acceleration." "Increase," Zethkar's crystalline form was resonating with harmonics of deep concern. We have intercepted fragments of their communications. They are not here for conquest or negotiation. They seek to consume what they call the energy source that feeds two prey species. They know about our war, and they see us as weakened targets. The implications hit Elena immediately. They've been watching. They know about the quantum crystals, and they know that 8 centuries of war have depleted both your civilization's military strength. Individually, neither the Catherian Empire nor the Nexari Collective has sufficient military force remaining to repel an invasion of this magnitude, Vexra admitted, her translated voice heavy with resignation. We have spent too much of our strength fighting each other. Marcus was already studying the tactical displays, his mind racing through possible defensive strategies. What about together? Combined fleet strength? Coordinated tactics? Impossible, Zethkar replied instantly. Our technologies are incompatible. Our command structures cannot interface. Our tactical doctrines are designed specifically to counter each other's capabilities. And even if we could coordinate, Vexra added, we have never fought alongside each other. 8 centuries of war have created reflexes that make cooperation in combat unthinkable. Elena felt a familiar surge of determination. For 24 days, she had watched 2 ancient civilizations slowly remember how to trust. She wasn't about to let fear and habit destroy that progress now. You're thinking like enemies again, she said firmly. Stop it. You've just spent nearly a month proving that your technologies aren't incompatible. They're complementary. Your tactical doctrines aren't contradictory, they're comprehensive. And your reflexes can be retrained in hours if the motivation is strong enough. Marcus stepped forward, switching to his command voice. Elena's right. I've been studying your military capabilities for weeks now. Separately, you're both formidable but predictable. Together, you could be unstoppable. He activated the holographic projector and began displaying tactical analyses. Catherian crystal. Ships can manipulate space-time, create dimensional shields, and generate quantum weapon arrays, but they're vulnerable to energy drain and bioviral attacks. Nexari bioships can adapt to any attack, heal from damage, and coordinate through collective consciousness, but they're vulnerable to quantum disruption and dimensional phase shifts. Elena picked up the thread. For 8 centuries, you've each been developing counters to the other's strengths. But what if instead of countering them, you amplified them? She gestured to the display showing the approaching alien fleet. These invaders don't know about your cooperation trial. They're expecting to face 2 weakened civilizations that hate each other. They're not prepared for a unified defense using hybrid technologies and coordinated tactics. The silence that followed was different from their previous moments of consideration. This wasn't about overcoming prejudice or cultural conditioning. This was about survival, and the clock was ticking. Zethkar was the first to speak. The logistical challenges are immense. We would need to integrate command structures, synchronize our fleets, and develop joint tactical protocols in a matter of hours. The collective is already processing the possibilities, Vexra added, her bioluminescent patterns showing rapid data exchange. But the risk of failure is catastrophic. If we attempt integration and fail, we will be even more vulnerable than we are separately. Marcus smiled grimly. Then we don't fail. Elena, how long do you need to develop a psychological framework for rapid trust building? 2 hours, Elena replied without hesitation. I'll need direct access to both command structures and complete cultural databases. I'll work on tactical integration, Marcus continued. Zethkar, Vexra, I need your best military minds working with me on developing hybrid battle strategies. And if this fails? Mediator Quill asked quietly. Elena looked at the approaching alien fleet, then at the 2 species who had been enemies for longer than human civilization had existed. Then we'll have failed trying something magnificent instead of succeeding at something destructive. The next 5 hours were the most intense in galactic history. Elena worked frantically to develop what she called crisis cooperation protocols, using emergency psychological techniques to bypass 8 centuries of conditioned mistrust. She discovered that both species responded to shared external threats the same way humans did, by temporarily setting aside internal conflicts in favor of survival. Meanwhile, Marcus coordinated the most complex military integration ever attempted. Cytherian quantum technicians worked alongside Nexari bioengineers to create hybrid ship configurations that neither species had imagined possible. Crystal matrix fields were integrated with biological adaptive systems, creating vessels that could phase through dimensions while simultaneously evolving new defenses. The breakthrough came when they realized that the Nexari collective consciousness could coordinate Cytherian quantum calculations in real time, while Cytherian harmonic systems could amplify and focus Nexari biocommunication across vast distances. Instead of two separate fleets, they were creating a single organism with crystalline precision and biological adaptability. Fleet integration at 60%. Vexra reported as bioships and crystal vessels began moving in unprecedented formation. Collective consciousness is successfully interfacing with quantum harmonic networks. Tactical systems synchronized, Zethkar added, his crystalline form now resonating with harmonics that included biological frequencies. Joint command protocols established. For the first time in 8 centuries, Cytherian and Nexari forces are operating under unified command. But the most remarkable change was psychological. As the two species worked together under extreme pressure, Elena watched centuries of hatred dissolve in hours. When survival was at stake, the differences that had seemed insurmountable became complementary strengths. The alien invasion fleet arrived exactly on schedule, expecting to find two weakened civilizations barely able to defend themselves. Instead, they encountered something that had never existed before: a truly integrated multi-species defense force with technologies that defied classification. The battle lasted exactly 47 minutes. The invading aliens found their energy draining, weapons useless against hybrid shields that could phase into parallel dimensions. Their adaptive armor was overwhelmed by quantum weapons guided by collective biological intelligence. Their numerical advantage was negated by defensive formations that combined crystalline precision with organic flexibility. But the most devastating aspect of the unified defense wasn't technological. It was tactical unpredictability. The invaders had studied 8 centuries of Cytherian Nexari warfare and had developed strategies to exploit both species' known weaknesses and predictable responses. They were completely unprepared for enemies who had overcome their weaknesses by working together. "Enemy fleet is retreating," Marcus announced, his voice carrying amazement. "They're leaving the galaxy entirely." Elena watched the tactical displays with tears in her eyes. In less than 5 hours, 2 civilizations had accomplished what 8 centuries of warfare had failed to achieve. They had become stronger together than they had ever been apart. Ambassador Zethkar's harmonics were unlike anything Elena had heard before, complex melodies that spoke of joy, relief, and wonder in equal measure. "We remember now," he said, his crystalline form blazing with new light. "We remember what we were before the war. We remember what we could become together." High Commander Vexra's consciousness rippled with patterns that seemed to encompass the entire station. The collective has experienced something unprecedented. For the first time in 8 centuries, we have grown instead of diminished. We have created instead of destroyed. The formal end of the war was almost anticlimactic. After 47 minutes of cooperation had achieved what 847 years of conflict could not. The decision was inevitable. Both species signed the permanent peace treaty, while their integrated fleets maintained joint patrols of the Andromedas Nebula. But the real victory wasn't military. It was psychological and cultural. 2 civilizations had rediscovered fundamental truths about themselves that had been buried under centuries of conditioning. They weren't natural enemies. They were natural partners who had simply forgotten how to see past their differences. 10 years later, Elena returned to what had once been called Harmony Point but was now known as Unity Station. The structure had grown, expanded through a combination of Cytherian crystal architecture and Nexari bioengineering. The station itself had become a symbol of what was possible when different forms of intelligence worked together. The Andromedas Nebula was now the most productive resource extraction site in galactic history. with hybrid technologies that yielded quantum crystals while simultaneously fostering new forms of biological evolution. The Cytherian-Nexari alliance had become the most powerful and influential force in the galaxy, not through conquest but through innovation and cooperation. Marcus had taken command of the Alliance Defense Fleet, the first truly integrated multi-species military force in galactic history. His tactical innovations had revolutionized military thinking across dozens of worlds, proving that diversity of thought and approach was the most powerful weapon any civilization could possess. Elena herself had become the galaxy's leading expert on interspecies psychology, helping other civilizations resolve conflicts that had seemed intractable. Her methods were now taught at diplomatic academies across the galaxy, based on a simple principle that had ended the longest war in galactic history. Sometimes the most complex problems required the simplest solutions. Sometimes 8 centuries of sophisticated thinking could be overcome by 5 hours of basic human common sense. And sometimes the greatest weapon any species could possess was the ability to see past differences to shared hopes and dreams. The war that had defined 2 civilizations for longer than human history had ended not with a bang, but with a revelation. They had never been enemies at all. They had been partners who simply forgot how to talk to each other. As Elena stood on the observation deck of Unity Station, watching Cytherian crystal ships and Nexari biovessels working together in perfect harmony, she smiled. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization hadn't been advanced technology or superior firepower. It had been the simple recognition that everyone, no matter how alien, just wanted to be understood. The war was over. The future had begun. If you liked this story, please like it and leave your feedback in the comments. Subscribe for more stories.